done. Now, he knew that this other guy who was intended to, or who was the first in line to be the kinsman redeemer, was likely to be coming along soon. So he already had a plan in place. He was purposeful in what he was doing. Now, one of the strange things in here is this other kinsman redeemer is never mentioned by name at all. The translation out of the ESV that we're using here says, "Turn aside, friend." Some translations said that Boaz called him by name, but there's nothing in the history of it that says that that actually happened. The Hebrew words that were used in there, and I forgot to put it in my notes, but they were two words that, when put together, have no real meaning to them. But they rhymed. And so a couple of the commentators that I was reading said that it's kind of like in English when we take two words that rhyme and we throw them together to make up a new thing, like hodgepodge. We know what a hodgepodge is, but if you try to define the two words together, it doesn't mean anything. Hodgepodge. So really what that seems to mean is, dude, hey, so-and-so, Mr. No Name. Why did they leave his name out? Possibly to save this fellow some embarrassment. Because as we're going to find out here really soon, he ignores what his calling may have been. He was the first in line to take care of Ruth and Naomi. And we're going to talk about it in just a little bit. He turns down that opportunity, but he's never mentioned by name. So anyway, when we come back, we're sitting at the city gate. Boaz is there. He sees this guy walking along. You, come here. And then calls 10 other kind of city leaders to come in. Now, at this point in time, the number 10 really didn't mean anything. The fact that he got 10 important people to come and sit with him to talk to this guy says a lot about how Boaz was viewed by the people in his community. He was a good guy. He was an important guy, and we've talked about that quite a bit over the last few weeks. This became such a big deal, the fact that he called 10 people in, that the number 10 became important in Jewish heritage after that. 10 people were, after this, required to create a quorum at synagogue. 10 people were required to properly officiate a Jewish wedding. This is one of those weird little things where the purpose that Boaz had, he didn't realize it was going to have greater purpose from God's perspective to his people. Maybe none of you found that interesting, but it was interesting to me, so you have to listen to it because I have a microphone. So he comes up. He gathers all these people around and says, sit down. We need to talk about this. We know we have our friend Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth who are here. And then it says that Naomi is selling her land. This is where things really got a little bit weird because Naomi couldn't sell her land because Naomi didn't own it. We've talked quite a bit in the past about the fact that at this point in time in the ancient Near East, women were not really looked at as being terribly important. Women were kind of just the sidecar to the motorcycle. The motorcycle was the thing that actually created power, controlled where things went, and the woman was just along for a ride. She didn't own the land, so she couldn't sell it. She kind of had some rights to the land because her husband had owned it. Here's your weird word for the day. Usufruct. U-S-U-F-R-U-C-T. Usufruct. What that word means is the use of the land, but you don't own the land. So she kind of had some controlling interest, but she didn't own it. She couldn't sell it. And what appears happened is Elimelech, her deceased husband, before they left, and again, we know they left because the famine and everything else, he had likely sold off the right to use the land to someone else. Now, without getting into really, really boring legalese stuff, We are taught in the Bible that if you did that, if you had to sell off your land, let someone use it, when the year of Jubilee rolled around, which happened every 7 years, you got it back, which was a crazy system. Now, Paul's talking about, this Paul, not biblical Paul, hey, I would like to find the coupon that says buy a cake, get a car. Well, back then, they had a sell your land, get it back free, which is a crazy coupon. You gave someone else the right to use it. You provided the right of usufruct. People could use the land, but at the end of that time, it went back to the original owner. So Naomi at this point had some rights to it. And what Boaz is trying to do is protect that right for her family. Because since Naomi didn't own it, it was going to be easy for someone else to potentially swoop in and take it. He's trying to protect her. He's being purposeful in the way that he does that. When you read through, and trust me, I know, reading through Deuteronomy, Leviticus, those kind of things, is not the most exciting part of the Bible. But when it talks about how the land is apportioned to everybody, it also talks about the fact that that land is intended to stay with one family forever. So Boaz's purpose is obeying God and protecting these women that he has grown to love. Now, obviously Boaz has done a little bit of homework because as he sees this guy coming along, he says, you are the guy. You have the right to do all of this stuff. You have the right to take care of this issue. Would you like to come along and help? And his answer is, yeah, I'll do that. It's the legal thing to do. Kind of. Because again, as we read into Jewish law, all it says is that if a man dies, then his brother must marry the widow. And it does say in here, it became the custom of the people for another near relative. So this unnamed guy was under no legal ramifications, no legal obligation to come along and marry Ruth. It was just sort of the custom because he was the next closest person. Apparently, Elimelech did not have a brother. So he says, sure, I'll do it. It wasn't the legal thing, but it was the right thing. Now you see, there's another passage that I have highlighted in your outline here, Matthew 5, 21 through 48. I'm not going to read the entire passage because it's fairly long, but I am going to highlight a couple of places. Matthew 5, 21 and 22, it says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Verses 27 and 28, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Verses 31 and 32, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. 33 and 34, again, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all. And maybe the best known part of that passage, you have heard it said, you shall love your enemy and hate your neighbor. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. What Boaz is doing is he's presenting, like, this is not just about what is legal, this is about what's doing what's right. Which is what Jesus was highlighting all through that address to his people. It's not about just doing it because it's legally required, but because it's morally correct. We're told that pure and undefiled religion is caring for widows and orphans. Are we legally obligated to do that? No. But it's morally right. When you see suffering, you can choose not to help with it. You're not legally obligated, but it's the morally right thing to do. Sometimes you do get into gray areas. When we were standing in line for the Mercy Me concert, there was a guy who collapsed. Because Melissa's a medical professional, she's actually kind of legally required to go over and help. she would have done it anyway because it's the morally correct thing to do. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but I'm useless. I panic in those kind of situations, especially if there's blood. Boaz's purpose was doing what was right, not just doing what is required. There has to be a purpose if we're to be effective redeemers. And part of what goes along with that is your second fill-in. If we're going to be effective as redeemers, we need to be purposeful, and we have to be willing. We can set in place a purpose to do something and not want to do it. Carlene, you haven't been here for a long time, so I get to pick on you today. Carlene, for the last 4 years, and by the way, she graduates college in 20 days. 20 days. I have no idea how I got this old. But she had a purpose 4 years ago to start in college. She was not willing to take statistics, which is why it's one of her final classes this semester. But, the willingness is, she said, whatever you have for me to do, I will do. There are a ton of people who start into college who have the purpose that I am going to get my degree and then either drop out, change majors, do something, because while they had a purpose, they weren't willing to do what was required for that purpose. So they try to shortcut it. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead and his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, in the last verse, or the last section, it finished with this guy saying, I will redeem it. I'm all in. Sign me up. I'm good. You said I get some land, yeah? Great. Okay, but you also have to take care of these people and understand that you'll be creating heirs for their family. Oh, I'm out. That's his answer. I don't want to do that. So he was good with the purpose of acquiring stuff, but he wasn't willing to do what went along with it. Why? A couple things that may go along with that. He may have decided that having an extra plot of land was going to require too much work. He may have simply been lazy. He may not have wanted the obligation of having a wife. There's nothing wrong with that. Paul tells us that if you're better off remaining single, then remain single. There's nothing wrong with singlehood. So maybe he didn't want a wife. Maybe he didn't want to have to share what he was getting. I think that's probably the biggest part of it. He's being told, yes, you get this, but it's to create heirs for this other family. And by the way, if you die, they get it. This doesn't go to your family. That firstborn son is effectively Mahlon's firstborn son. He may have been concerned about what it would do to his reputation if he married a foreigner. He may have been thinking, all right, so Naomi left with her husband and kids, and Mahlon married this Moabitess, and he died. Maybe that was God punishing him because he married a foreign woman. I don't want to have to deal with that. I'm not marrying Ruth. I don't want to die because God's angry with me for marrying this weird lady. Whatever the case is, he was unwilling. Boaz was willing. This next thing, effective redeemers are purposeful and willing, and they are committed. I'll use myself in this example since I kind of used the school version. And when I started college, a long time ago, back in 1990-ish, I had a purpose. I was willing. I was grossly uncommitted. I was willing to complete the degree as long as I didn't have to commit to doing homework or showing up for class, or because that cut into my partying time. I needed to be committed. says, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. I'll admit, as I read through this passage preparing for today, that was the first question I listed for myself. What is the deal with taking off your shoe? Glad I asked, because then I can give you an answer. Removing of the shoe, especially in this type of transaction, indicated you were giving up your right to walk on the land. You were giving to that person your right to walk the land. That's why you gave up a shoe. It was also a physical manifestation saying, no, we went through this, we had all this done, and look, I got the shoe to prove it. Now, I don't know if there was any kind of engraving, if there was anything else done to the shoe to say that, yes, this absolutely was that person's shoe. But that's also part of why Boaz said, hey, 10 other guys, come over here and watch, as it says. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. He was committed to doing this, not just to grow his own wealth, but to provide for these families that he was now a part of, or would very soon be part of. The next fill in here. So you can be purposeful, willing, committed, and the next step of this, especially for Boaz, is you have to be selfless. The act of redemption is not about yourself. The cross was not because Jesus thought this was going to be a good thing for him. You must be selfless. Verse 10 says also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. When he says that the name of the dead may not be cut off, the belief in that time is that if people stopped talking about someone, it's basically like that person never existed. And that was a major, major issue for them. And even currently in the Near East and the Far East, respect is a huge part of how things go. Honor is a major deal. So if you've ceased to exist because people are no longer talking about you, that's a big deal for your family. Boaz is saying, I'm not doing this just because Ruth's cute and I want to marry her. He's saying, I want to do this because I want to protect her deceased husband's rights. I want to protect his memory. I want to make sure that in the year 2019, in this church in Colorado Springs, people are still talking about Mahlon. This is not really because Boaz thought this was going to be a big deal for him. He was selflessly giving. And another big part of this, and he's an important, respected Hebrew man. And he's saying, I am so dedicated to doing this to help this man's family, I'm going to marry a foreign woman. We read in the Bible about another marriage, another groom and his bride. The early parts of the Bible, God's people were simply the ones he had chosen. And later, his son would become the groom who would take a bride from outside of those original chosen people. Boaz was foretelling that. This marriage would directly lead down the line to Jesus Christ. He is showing us that a marriage outside of your normal culture is going to be okay because we are all interrelated because of who God is. Boaz is saying, this is not about me. This is about God's plan. This is far bigger than myself. And that leads directly into the next fill-in, which is that we must be faithful if we're going to be effective redeemers. Now, everything leading up to this point, and we have talked about Boaz and his faith and his talking to God. Well, I thought maybe my sermon notes were coming up there. I was going to be super impressed if you had those. and a little worried because I very seldom pay attention to them. But the people have seen what Boaz is doing. Then all the people who were at the gates and the elders said, we are witnesses. Okay, here's another strange side point that some of you may not have any interest in. At the end of verse 10, Boaz said, you are witnesses this day. People said, we are witnesses. I know in the Hebrew, really all they did was say, witnesses. That was it. Do you know why? In the biblical Hebrew language, there was no word for the word yes. How weird is that? Again, this is part of why I love sermon prep, because I learned all these weird little factoids. I go, huh. But there was no word for the word yes. So they couldn't just say, yeah, we agree. So say, you are all witnesses. Witnesses! But they were giving their assent. They were saying, yes, we understand. But then they're saying, let you be like, let the woman who's coming to your house, let her become like Rachel and Leah. Let your house be like Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Let your faith grow in the way that these families have grown because of their faithfulness to God. We see what you're doing, Boaz. You are listening to God through all of this, and may he continue to bless your family because of it. Now, we know that Rachel and Leah, they were viewed as more a good family. The fact, again, that we see Tamar's name come up in here. Now, if you don't remember the story, Tamar's husband had died. She was supposed to get to marry his brother, hence the whole Levirate marriage thing. Her father-in-law decided to go ahead and blow that off. Tamar was kind of waiting. Nothing's happening. So she pretends to be a prostitute, connects with her old father-in-law, and gets pregnant. Perez comes from that. This is part of the heritage of our Savior. That's important. And it's especially important for me to remember that no matter how much of a wreck I am, Jesus says, dude, I got that in my background too. My family's as messed up as you are. And I'm the Son of God. Great can come from messed up backgrounds. God's plans can be worked through areas that you would never think are going to work. And these people said, hallelujah, Boaz, you're such a great godly man. I hope your life is as good as this crazy pretending to be a hooker illegitimate child. Come on, who besides God can make that a great thing? And we get to be part of that. I realize that seems like a weird thing to celebrate, but you should be celebrating that. So his faithfulness, the people recognize. And through all of this, Boaz is moving forward and saying, I'm going to help make this right. God is going to use this to make things right. We're going to move into our final thought. I'm not giving you the fill-ins yet. You see there's 3 names listed under there. These are kind of other folks who were used as examples of redeemers through the Old Testament. Let's look first of all at Noah. And we know God was looking down, and he's seeing everything that's going on, and he says, this is a mess. These people that I've created, they're getting everything wrong. Noah, you're pretty solid. I'm going to give you a chance to rectify all this. I'm going to let you be the redeemer. Go build a big honking boat and start collecting animals. Your daughter would have been great with that. Rory could have been the animal collector, man. She would have thrived. Because, man, I'm sitting out here this morning, kind of reading through my notes, drinking my coffee, and she just walks right up the office door. Have you seen any sugar ants this morning? No, babe, thankfully. I love how excited she gets about bugs. Anyway, back to this. God said, Noah, I'm going to use you to start to get everything right again. And Noah was flawed. Next name we look at on here, Moses. Moses had everything going for him. He'd been adopted into Pharaoh's family. he's in a good place. He could have just sat back, taken it easy, enjoyed where he was in life, and not done anything with it. Instead, he said, my people, my family members, my heritage, these people are enslaved. I've got to do the right thing and set them free. Now, we know that Moses, again, was not perfect. He didn't speak well. He killed someone. He didn't listen to God's instructions properly. But his desire to serve God well redeemed his people who eventually got to come to the promised land. Jonah. Jonah is another one of those can't think of details when I think of the story. And if you haven't watched it, it's pretty great. Jonah, reluctant redeemer, to put it mildly. God was very subtle in trying to change his mind by letting it eat. At this point, his seemed to break a little bit. But eventually he said, okay, God, I will do what you've called me to do, even though these Ninevites are terrible people and they hit each other with big fish. Wait, that's the VeggieTales version. But these are horrible, hateful people, and God, I don't want to go help them. But eventually he said, okay, God, what you've called me to do, I will do. Even perfect copies, glorified. In Amsterdam, there is a museum that is solely set aside for the works of Vincent van Gogh. They've got a lot of his paintings in there on display. In the basement of this museum, they have a lot of his old notebooks, sketchbooks, things that he never put out for public consumption. And it said that in some of these sketchbooks, there are page after page after page of the same drawing, which eventually became some of his masterpieces. He was working on it to perfect things until he got to the right spot and says, this is what you need to see. This is what God is doing through his people to point to Jesus Christ. And we get to be part of that story. When he took Noah and said, build this boat, it was about eventually Jesus coming to save everything. When he took Moses and said, you need to bring your people to the promised land and set them free, it was pointing to Jesus Christ. When he took Jonah and said, you need to go and talk to people who want nothing to do with God so they have a chance to be saved and know me and be loved by me, he was pointing to Jesus Christ. And when he said, Boaz, go take care of this Moabite woman, marry to the wrong people so she can come to know the true God, he was pointing to Jesus Christ. And if you call yourself a Christian, the way you interact with everybody you come into contact with is pointing to Jesus Christ. We get to continue to be part of the story. That is amazing to me. There will never be an extra chapter in this book, but our lives are the continuation of this book. In 2 weeks, we get to celebrate the Redeemer, capital R. When we talk about him defeating death, all of this was foretold with all of these insignificant redeemers. I think all of us can look back in our lives and think there's times that I've done things well. There are times that I've helped people. Thankfully, I can look back and think that I've done some of that in my own life. It hasn't been recent. As I mentioned up front, I've been struggling with a lot of things. So our weekly challenge is as much for me, maybe more for me than anyone else. Find a way to be a redeemer for someone in your life this week. Find someone who is going through something detrimental and help them to overcome it. You may not have to look real far. I know I don't. All I got to do is open my eyes and look across the living room. All I got to do is look in the mirror. Let other people be a redeemer to you. I mean, that is a huge struggle for me. I'm an American man. We get stuff done. We don't need help. Find a way to redeem. Find a way to be redeemed. Remember who your Redeemer is. Follow into his arms and let him help. Heavenly Father, I ask your forgiveness for how bad I have been at this recently. Lord, that I have been more the detriment than the assister in overcoming detriment. God, I love this story that you have allowed us to study over these last few months. That as we look at Boaz and his desire to be purposeful and loving and willing and faithful and all of these things and listening to you, God, I pray for myself and I pray for this church that we would do the same. That we would desire to help others in their detriment in order to point people to you. And I thank you so much for Grace First Church. I thank you for the lives that have been changed, the souls that have been saved because of this church. God, I pray for those who have never met Christ in a saving way, that today could be their day of salvation. And God, I pray for those who have, like me, gotten away from that closeness in relationship, that we would come running back to you. Father, I realize that when we mess up, you don't want to punish us. You just want us to call you. Say, Dad, I messed up again. And you're just going to say, come to me, my child whom I love. Father, thank you for what has been a great morning. Thank you for being a great God. And Father, as we prepare to take our offerings this morning, all I ask is that they be used to expand your kingdom, to do your work, and to grow your glory. In Christ's name, amen.
All my sins again. All my hope. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God my yesterday's gone. And all my sins are forgiven. Yes, I've been washed by the blood. Thanks for coming this morning. You're dismissed. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday. There's a kind of thing that just breaks a man, breaks him down to his knees. And God, I've been broken more than a time or two, yes. But you picked me up and showed me what it means to be a man. Come on and sing. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God my yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven. Yes, I've been washed by the blood. Amen. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God my yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven. Yes, oh, I've been washed by the blood.